Storm 331 back for an impromptu streaming. Basically, we're going to be, as promised, we're going to be doing both Sahad and Hummel's character guide and skill guides. We're going to get these out of the way this morning. Tomorrow morning, we will try to have Rakota's and Donna's taken care of as well. So we'll be nearly done with the character guides pretty soon. With the only things left to do for this project being creating a guide for raid and beast hunts, as well as a fishing guide, a small fishing guide, and even my recommended options for what kind of skills you should probably train your party members in for maximum value and effort. So anyway, this guide's going to be helping beginners and anyone that's into Ys VIII learn their characters as well as the skills they're going to be using throughout the entire game. I will not be listing the levels of which you'll start learning to spark the skills. They will be put on the video description. This will be done with all characters, as with Adol and Loxia. So anyway, we're the only thing you're going to be learning about this guide for skills is what happens when you level up and master the skills and what they do, as well as how your characters perform in terms of combat. So right now, let's go ahead and get started. So Sahad is pretty much the most powerful party member in the entire game. He has the largest amount of HP without resorting to any elixirs with 6,500. He also has the highest strength in the entire game of 975. So he ranks first in both HP and strength, but he has the lowest defense, which is very ironic considering the fact you'll be using him mostly as a tank. He has only 315. Part of that reason is because his default weapon, which is the Broken Anchor, starts off with a minus 10 defense decrease. And as you upgrade and enhance Sahad's weapon throughout the entire game, that decrease gradually goes down. And eventually, by the time you fully upgrade the Leviathan axe, you'll finally get rid of the minus 10. But even without that automatic minus 10 defense decrease, his defense is still lower than most of the entire party. Probably the next party member that has the lowest amount of defense outside of Sahad is shockingly Donna herself. But in terms of overall strength, he, Hummel, and Donna are probably your strongest party members in terms of strength in general. So it's not so if you want to prioritize damage, having these three on your team will eventually see most of your enemies go down pretty quickly. But then again, when you're training up with skills, you gotta switch up party members consistently. Another downside about Sahad is that his movement speed is pretty poor. You do get access to adventure gear, which is the Gale feather that improves your dash speed. And if you give him the feather boots, that improves his speed a lot further. In raid and hunt battles, speed is really important, especially when you need to prevent enemy monsters from destroying key locations like your barricades, your lures, and your torches. And your stockades. So having Sahad being able to get to those places pretty fast is very crucial. But in terms of combat, he actually rules with a large amount of monsters thanks to his area effect skills, like as you see here. In comparison to Loxia, whereas she's like below average on HP and strength, Sahad is pretty much the polar opposite, having more HP and strength, but less defense than her. And another thing that separates the two is the fact that Sahad has mostly area effect attacks, allowing him to attack mobile enemies. But he has very few options for single attacks. Basically, he only gets access to High Wave, Gale Blow, Upper Break, Great Ram, which allows him to attack, gives him some options for single attacking. And he's like one of the two characters with a skill that doesn't really damage enemies, the other one being Donna, but they both have different effects. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and go over his skills right now and get those out of the way. So the first skill we're going to cover is Wild Appeal. This does not damage enemies, but instead it acts as an aggro drawer or a taunt skill that allows Sahad to draw enemies near him. So when you level up and build up the skill, this expands the taunt range. So any enemies caught in that shockwave will get hit by it and target Sahad. This is actually a very good skill to use in hunt and raid battles, and if you do take control of Sahad, use that to keep the enemies away from the barricades, lures, torches, and stockades, since you want to max out your bonus points whenever possible. So you might have a better option of doing that in the air, by the way. So coming up next for skills is Highway. This is one of two of his default skills that he joins the party when you fight the Admiral Draugl the first time, the first out of four. And this is actually a pretty decent projectile attack. It allows him to fire a short-range shockwave, and it can also be used to hit any resource points or objects that are out of reach or on higher elevations. So this is actually a very good skill to have earlier on. Leveling up and mastering this skill will improve the size of the shockwaves, allowing you to deal more damage as well as hit more enemies in turn. So coming up next is Grand Anchor. This is actually one of my favorite earlier skills with Sahad because you can just literally treat it like a jackhammer right there. And basically, when you level up and master this skill, this will improve the shockwave range of the radius of the attack. So it has very high, I think he has a very high stun of B+, which is pretty nice. It does lose out when you get to higher level enemies a little bit later, and I would recommend switching this out for Magna Wave. But if you need something to cover your wide range of enemies, this is actually a very good skill to have earlier on. Gale Blow is another one of Sahad's projectile attacks. You'll learn this from being Master Kong. He'll and for training. Sahad will be the first character after Rakota to start learning skills from Master Kong. So basically, when you perform this attack, he'll throw this projectile. Leveling up and mastering this skill will improve the size of the projectile. Now, I don't know if it has a status effect attached to it, but then again, I usually see enemies get destroyed too quickly to pay attention. But this is actually a very decent projectile attack overall, and I would swap out Highway for this once you get access to this. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and swap his skills out for the next four, which are Vortex, Upper Break, Great Ram, and Power Strike. And we're going to switch locations because we do need to refill our SP coming up so we can get more use. Oops, that's not the camp area. Oh boy, silly me. All right, now this is actually more appropriate because this is actually right near the sea, which is pretty much Sahad's natural best area. So we're going to go ahead and refill the SP real quick before we get started with the skills. All right. So now that we got that out of the way, we'll go ahead and cover his next skill, which is Vortex. Like High Wave, this is one of his default skills, and this actually has pretty decent stats for a starting skill. Be all around. And basically, when Sahad attacks, he'll attack any enemies near him and do a huge finish. Believe it or not, before the final swing, you can actually cancel it out to another skill if you're fast enough. Basically, leveling up and mastering the skill will improve the strike range and radius of the Vortex. So coming up next is Upper Break. This is basically Sahad's launcher skill. This basically allows him to perform an upward attack that can be used to hit any enemies that are flying or on higher elevations. Leveling up and mastering this skill will allow you to basically improve the swing of the attack as well as unleash a shockwave at mastery. As you can see right there. Normally it just hits one enemy, but it can, however, be used at mastery to hit additional enemies with that shockwave. So coming up next is Great Ram. This skill will allow us to have Sahad perform a charge attack like this. And one benefit about performing this skill is that it allows Sahad to basically gain additional defenses when performing this skill. This is also notable for having very high stun at S, which comes in very handy for stronger normal monsters and bosses. Leveling up and mastering the skill, of course, will allow you to basically improve the force of the attack as well as increase the distance a bit. And he also has a very unique pose when he performs the Great Ram in the air, because he doesn't really move when he does. But you can actually control the ram and have him move forward a bit, quite a little bit further too. So if you want an actual decent single hitting target skill, you should probably use Great Ram. Not to mention it has some pretty good benefits too, for in terms of lowering damage. This is actually very good um, rated hunt battles if you want to keep your HP high and avoid taking massive damage. Power Strike is coming up next. This allows Sahad to perform a very wide swipe, and this is actually probably his best single targeting skill, as well as hitting any other enemies around. So mastering this skill allows him to hit anything behind him, I think, and it also allows him to deal a lot more damage too in terms of explosions. So anyway, that covers his skills. So let's cover some Seine Toss, Magna Wave, Spiral Anchor, and Rage and Deluge. So let's get our SP refilled before we start doing those. So some of the characters actually get C rank skills that are usually listed as in the put in the B category. So they might have been originally intended for being ranked as B in power, but this may have been a unintentional or deliberate choice by developers to hide the real power of Seine Toss. But anyway, Seine Toss doesn't look like it's a very powerful attack, but it's actually more stronger than it appears, especially if you use it on weaker enemies. So basically, when you use Seine Toss, you basically toss this huge net and pulls any enemies towards Sahad. Now, technically, in normal gameplay and venturing, this is actually not nearly as useful, but in raid and hunt battles, this is actually very good for pulling enemies away from the barricade, lures, torches, and stockades. So this is actually a very decent skill. Against smaller enemies, these will launch your enemies upward and pull them towards Sahad as well. And also, leveling up and mastering the skill will also allow you to basically improve the size of the net. So it allows you to cover more range in turn. And the next one is probably my personal favorite skill, the Magna Wave. This allows Sahad to perform a Great Anchor, but instead of creating a shockwave, he'll pull off a large amount of earth and hit a lot of enemies. This can also be used to hit enemies at higher elevations as well. So leveling up and mastering the skill will improve the amount of earth pulled up as well as the striking range of the attack. So this is actually one of Sahad's more hard-hitting skills in the entire game, and remains virtually useful throughout the entire adventure. So I recommend getting this and maxing this out whenever possible, especially if you're going to play as Sahad. So coming up next is Spiral Anchor. This is actually a more enhanced version of Power Strike, but it adds another jump into the attack. So it also adds a water effect too when you level up and master it. Leveling up and mastering this will improve the strike range radius of the attack as well as add a water effect to it. So all in all, it's basically just like an enhanced version of Power Strike with a follow up and then an aerial follow up, and it also has some vacuum capabilities too to pull enemies into it as well. And finally, coming up to Raging Deluge. This is actually, in my opinion, Sahad's only form of DPS with his skills. Basically, he'll call up these torrents of water torrents around him and hit any enemies that are near him. Basically, when you level up and master the skill, it improves the amount of pillars that appear as well as the strike range of the shockwave as well. So basically, that covers all of Sahad's skills. I'm going to go ahead and refill his SP real quick for Hummel, who will be covering up next. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and give you my recommendations for endgame skills. For starters, I would recommend having him use Magna Wave, Spiral Anchor, Raging Deluge, in Power Strike for his options. Power Strike is going to probably be more used as his single targeting as well as Spiral Anchor. They're both very strong attacks. Raging Deluge is going to be his other option for hitting mobile enemies around him, as well as being his form of DPS in general. And Magna Wave is pretty much there for hitting enemies right in front of him, as well as inflicting massive damage on the targets. So basically, overall, Sahad's going to be hitting very high damage, but given the fact that all three of his A-level skills for power are on here, you might want to give him any accessories that will lower the SP cost, so that way he gets more usages out of them. And of course, you should always have Upper Break on mastered as well if you're going to go for aerial combos. And of course, Seine Toss and Wild Appeal should also be considered mastered if you're going into raid and hunt battles. Those are going to be extremely useful to keep enemies from going into areas or objects you don't want them attacking. So anyway, that covers Sahad, and we're going to take a small break so I can rest my throat and refresh it and get Hummel into position for our next guide. We'll be covering Hummel next, and I'm Storm 331 temporarily signing off. I'll be taking a small break, but when we get back, we'll be resuming with Hummel's guide, and we'll catch you all in a bit.